Go ahead and start Photoshop. You might have a welcome screen that pops up, but by default there's no file automatically opened if you just start Photoshop the normal way, that is by clicking on its icon rather than double-clicking on a Photoshop file. You can open up an image by going to File, Open if you want, but it's not necessary for this lecture. While I'm using Windows, the screen on the Mac should look similar except a few differences which I'll go over. If you're on a Mac, it can be helpful to go to Window and then Application Frame down here and make sure that's checked. The Preferences menu is under Apple up in the top left hand corner instead of Edit like it is on the PC. And for every shortcut on the PC that uses Control, Mac uses Command. And for every shortcut that uses Alt on the PC, it's Option on the Mac. I'll include both in my instruction though. By default, the Photoshop workspace has a few panels open. You'll see the toolbar here, the options bar up here, the color and swatches panel over here, and the layers, channels, and paths panels over here. There are also a few collapsed panels on the right-hand side of the screen, and if you hover your mouse over them, they should indicate what panels they are. All of these panels have different functions within Photoshop. For example, the Layers panel shows all the layers within a file, and here we can adjust the opacity or the blending modes of a layer. The Brushes panel features many advanced brushing options. And the toolbar features all Photoshop tools, including the selection tools, pen tools, type tools, and a few other options such as setting the foreground color and background color. If you ever don't see a panel because it was closed by clicking the X in the top corner of the panel, just go to Window and then click on the name of the panel to bring it back up. All open panels should have a check mark beside them, so here we can see Layers, Swatches, Options, and Tools are all checked and visible. The panels can be moved around the workspace by clicking and dragging them with the mouse. Over here you'll notice that some panels are expanded and some panels that are collapsed. We can click and drag on the left-hand side of the collapsed panels and it'll stretch the panels so that their names are included. And you can also click and drag it back to the default. We can also rearrange these collapsed panels by clicking and dragging them. And we can also click and drag a group of them or one of them off the collapsed panels group so they float off to the side. We can also click and drag them back into the group. If we click on the right-facing arrows located at the top of the group of panels, it will expand those panels. Likewise, if we click on the left-facing arrows at the top of an expanded group of panels, it will collapse them. You can double-click on the top part of the panel to toggle between the expanded and collapsed view. We can also right-click on a PC or control-click on a Mac over the top of the panels to bring up some more options such as turning on or off Auto Collapse Iconic Panels option. If that is unchecked, when I click on an iconic panel and then click off in the workspace somewhere, it stays open. If it's checked, then the iconic panel collapses by default when I click somewhere. We can also go to Interface Options, which is part of the Preferences menu. Here we can toggle the default for whether or not iconic panels collapse. Another way to get to the Preferences menu is in Macs, you'd need to click on Photoshop in the upper left-hand corner and then click Preferences. On a PC, click on Edit, then Preferences. In this example, we're adjusting interface settings. In this menu, we can also adjust the background color of the workspace and other options such as whether or not there's a drop shadow behind the canvas. One important option to keep checked when you're new to Photoshop is the Show Tooltips checkbox. When checked, Photoshop will give a hint or tip as to what a tool does when you hover over it with your mouse. There are many panels available in Photoshop, but of course we won't be using all of them all the time. But two panels to keep open include the toolbar and the options bar, which work together. Depending on which tool is selected in the toolbar, the options bar will change to give more options for that specific tool. For example, if I click on a selection tool, the options are different from when I select the brush tool. By default, the toolbar is in a single column. If you prefer a double column with the same tools, just click the arrows at the top of the toolbar and it'll toggle between the two modes. In these lectures, I'll be using the single column mode, so keep it to that mode for minimal confusion until at least you get to the point where you can quickly find all the various tools on the toolbar. How these panels are arranged in the program all depends on what workspace we have activated. By default, the Essentials workspace is active. If we look up at the top right-hand corner of the workspace, we can click on the name Essentials and switch to another workspace. For example, we can choose 3D for a good panel setup for working in 3D graphics, motion for video editing, and there are also workspaces for digital painting, photography, typography. If you open up a bunch of panels and want to reset it back to the default Essentials workspace, just go to Reset Essentials and it will reset it back to the default. We can also create custom workspaces. If we have a few panels open that we use a lot in photo editing, we could then go to New Workspace and give it a name. We can also delete workspaces, but we can't delete a workspace that we're currently using. So that's the basics of panels and workspaces in Photoshop. Panels can be very useful, and knowing how to customize your workspace can help improve your productivity and workflow. In the next lecture, I'll cover the process of creating a new document in Photoshop.